Hey everyone, I'm Angie Miller, the host of Strong Mind, Strong Body. And coming up on this episode, I deep dive into conflict avoidance and people pleasing. And I share with you some very personal stories about how people pleasing has held me back and how conflict avoidance and people pleasing increase our stress and actually create these relationships that are very, very one sided. I think you'll love this episode and get a lot out of it. When you're finished watching, I hope that you will like, follow, and subscribe. And thank you so much for tuning in to Strong Mind, Strong Body. Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller. And today we're diving into something that you personally might shy away from or avoid. But that avoidance, specifically conflict avoidance, may literally be making you sick, emotionally and physically. So I'm going to start with my own story. I grew up the youngest of 5 girls in a single parent household. When I was really young, my grandparents were like my surrogate parents. There was an age gap between me and my older sisters, and my mom, who was working double and triple shifts to keep us afloat after her marriage ended, she needed full-time care for me because I wasn't yet in school. And that's where my grandparents stepped in. So from this very young age, I think I was perceived as being very strong and very independent. And generally, that's still how people see me today. But underneath that strong exterior is a pretty sensitive interior. I'm deeply in tune with other people's emotions, and I will often fall into the trap of making their emotions my concern, which really means that I become overly responsible for checking on other people and making sure they're happy, using their emotional state as a benchmark for how I should feel, good, bad, successful, or not. See, from a very young age, I think I got the message that I needed to be the kid who didn't cause a problem, the kid who could take care of herself and who didn't need anything. And if she did, she'd find a way to get it herself because she was resourceful, financially and otherwise. So my first job was babysitting, and then a paper route, and then various jobs all before the age of 15. So I learned to be the kid who did well in school, didn't break the rules, and I would even tell on myself notoriously if I thought I did something wrong, no matter how slight. See, I believe that if I did these things, if I was the kid who didn't cause any trouble, if I was, quote, perfect, then I could make my mom's job easier. And maybe she would be okay, despite the stress of raising 5 girls on her own. I let my sisters make all the mistakes and cause all the problems, while I figured out how to manage my world independently and not rock the boat. Because ultimately, I think I wanted to rescue my mom from pain. And I carried that into adulthood. So I made myself then responsible for other people's emotions. And when you do that, what you're going to find is that other people are a little bit too willing to put their emotional state on you. After all, they're not angry. You made them angry. Or they don't have a problem. It's something that you're doing that's making them have the problem. And it made me an easy target for dysregulated family to shift blame and responsibility. And it took me decades and a lot of work to realize what I already know, but I couldn't seem to put into practice. And that's that I can only control me. And in no way am I responsible for other people's emotional health or lack thereof. So here's the interesting thing about my pattern. I wouldn't say that I'm conflict avoidant because I can advocate for myself, but it's my deeply ingrained people pleasing that gets in the way. It's me making myself responsible for other people's emotions and constantly taking the emotional temperature in the room that creates so much anxiety. So I have a question for you. What if I told you that your inability to have hard conversations or your compulsion to manage everyone else's feelings is creating chronic stress that could actually be destroying your health. And what if your people pleasing and your conflict avoidance aren't just exhausting? What if they're actually protective strategies, but they're actually keeping you trapped in cycles of anxiety and physical tension and emotional depletion? So, today we're going to deep dive into the hidden health crisis of avoidance or conflict avoidance. And we're going to explore how people pleasing plays a role and where these patterns actually come from. And most importantly, how to start healing your relationship with conflict so that you can reclaim your physical and your emotional health. Because here's the thing, as a coach and as a therapist and as a human myself, I see this pattern destroying people's lives every single day. And I've lived it myself and still find myself getting trapped. And so I think we should talk about it. So, first, let's talk about what's actually happening in your body when you avoid conflict or you exhaust yourself people pleasing. Because it's not just about hurt feelings or awkward conversations, it's really about your physical health. Research from Harvard's program on negotiation, otherwise known as PON, shows that suppressing emotions during conflict leads to eroded trust and it compounds unresolved problems over time. And I can definitely attest to this on a personal level. But what's not always talked about is the physical cost. So when you swallow your words, your body knows. When you smile and nod, but really you're seething inside, it's like your nervous system is keeping score. So when you say yes, every fiber of your being, when every fiber of your being wants to say no, you're creating this form of like emotional constipation, just like the physical kind, where everything gets backed up, all your emotions get backed up, and probably what's eventually going to come out of your mouth is not going to be healthy. So let's break down what's really happening in your body. First, you're probably carrying muscle tension, right? Every time you hold back an authentic response, or you bite your tongue, or you force a smile, you're going to be tense. Your muscles are going to contract. Maybe your jaws clench, or your jaw clenches, or maybe your stomach tightens, or it could just be that for me, my stomach starts to hurt, or I get a tension headache because you're literally holding the truth in your muscles and it hurts. But then let's talk about your digestive system, because that expression, swallow your words, or again, bite your tongue, right? Well, your gut takes that very literally. When you consistently suppress authentic responses, your digestive system gets messed up and it starts to rebel. So again, there's the stomach aches, the digestive issues, the knot in your gut that never seems to go away. That's your body trying to actually process emotions that you're not letting yourself express. And it's like Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. You just keep stacking it in there. And this body of yours is like, I don't know what to do with all of this, because you are a steaming suppression machine waiting to pop, right? So sleep can become another casualty. How do you rest when you're carrying around all these unexpressed thoughts and opinions and feelings? So your mind often in the middle of the night is going to cycle these conversations about, oh, I should have said, oh my gosh, story of my life, rumination. And then you can't sleep because your nervous system is so activated because there's all this unfinished business. So then there's your immune system. We know that when stress compromises your immune system. So when there's unresolved conflict, it literally suppresses your immune system. You get sick more often, you take longer to recover, you feel run down, and you get depleted because your body is using all of its energy to manage your stress that you're holding because you're withholding and you're not letting yourself be authentic. But here's what's really heartbreaking. People avoid conflict generally because they think that it will preserve relationships and they think it's going to keep everyone safe. But conflict actually creates the opposite effect. You're not preserving your relationships because you're not being authentic. How is that preserving a relationship? Here's what I see happening when people avoid conflict. One, it increases their stress levels because unresolved issues create this persistent low-grade anxiety. Number two, makes us lonelier because we don't feel truly connected because we're not really being our true selves. So there's a part of us that's just kind of shut down in these relationships. Number three, it decreases relationship satisfaction because when we suppress our needs, then our relationships become very one-sided. It's all about what the other person needs or wants because we're not really being authentic. And then guess what? Number four is the big one. It leads to resentment. And in reality, you're not really sure, do you resent you or the person you feel like you can't be authentic with? Because there's a lot of personal resentment that you know you're holding back and you don't know what to do with that. So think about it. When you're constantly people pleasing and avoiding difficult conversations, you're essentially lying to everyone around you. You're really just going around going, I'm okay, but you're not okay. And no one really knows it. So your body, though, knows the difference between authentic connection and performative niceness, and it's going to pay the price. So I'm going to give you a client example. We'll call her Maria. She came to me because she was experiencing feelings of depression. She couldn't figure out why. I mean, her life looked pretty good on the outside. She had a nice job, a good apartment, supportive family, quality relationships, quality friendships. But she really had a hard time with saying no at work and in her personal life. She was the employee that everyone turned to when they needed something because she always said yes. And her friends saw her as the reliable one. She was always the one who would show up and help everybody. And she would never say no, even when she was exhausted. And when they needed someone to listen to their problems, she was always there. But when Maria needed support, somehow her friends were always too busy or they had their own drama going on. So at family gatherings, she was the one who was always like cleaning up after everybody. And everybody's like, oh, Maria's got it. Don't worry, Maria's got it. Or maybe they would disagree, her siblings would disagree, and they would call her to vent. So she had to kind of play the mediator in the family. And so she felt responsible for keeping the family dynamics kind of level or stable, if you will. What Maria didn't realize really was that her body was screaming enough in all capital letters. Her nervous system was so overloaded from constantly betraying her own needs that it was shutting her down. Her depression wasn't random. It was her body's rebellion against a lifetime of conflict avoidance and people pleasing. So she thought she was this good employee, this good friend, this daughter who never caused problems. She thought her people pleasing made her be lovable and valuable. But really, honestly, it made her expendable and very invisible. She's just kind of sitting in the sidelines waiting to take care of everybody. So her boss took her for granted. Her friends saw her as a support system rather than a whole person with needs. And her family always assumed she could handle it. This is what conflict avoidance really costs us. It's not just our health. It costs us our sense of self. It's like we lose our authentic self. And remember, I did the whole Parts Work podcast, and self is your core center. It's your value system. When your life feels like it's smooth and you feel curious and calm, you're in self. But when your nervous system's out of whack, you're the opposite of being in self. So where do these patterns come from? Well, I know, listen, I'm on social media. It's all over social media. Blame your parents, blame your parents. Well, good luck, because what now? And anyway, all the parent blaming and shaming, where is that going to get everybody, right? So your parents did their best. Their parents did their best. We're going to go with that assumption. Let's not blame or shame. Let's talk about what you can do. So why are some of us so terrified of conflict that we'll make ourselves sick to avoid it? And why do some of us get so committed to managing everyone's emotions that we're willing to lose ourselves? Well, here's what I've learned. People pleasing is not a trait. It's a protective strategy. It's something that we might have developed in childhood or in an experience or even an important relationship where we didn't feel safe. We got connected to the wrong person. And when we learned that our worth was conditional on being agreeable and low maintenance. Maybe you grew up in a house where conflict meant danger. Maybe you learned that early that the way to stay safe was to be the peacekeeper. Or maybe, you grew up with a parent who couldn't handle big emotions. And so you heard things like, oh, you're too much or you're too sensitive. Um, you know, Maybe you just learned that love was conditional. Okay. If you were accommodating. So, growing up as the youngest in a single parent household, I feel like I learned early that my job was to be the kid who didn't add stress. So, I became the emotional barometer for my family, constantly scanning the room to see if everyone is okay, almost always in fight or flight, constantly trying to fix problems that weren't mine to fix. And I brought that into my most important relationships in my life, which didn't actually serve me. Or maybe you found yourself in a relationship or a job where you had this super unpredictable, dysregulated boss or partner they were impulsive or moody, and you were always like, ooh, 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 walking on eggshells, scanning the emotional temperature, making sure you wouldn't detonate an emotional bomb. So you learned to tread carefully because you didn't want to make them angry. You didn't want to make them raise their voice and project all their emotional vomit onto you. So, whatever it was, childhood, bad relationship, bad boss, I don't know. These patterns don't just disappear overnight just because we leave the relationship or we quit the job or whatever. They become our way of being in the world, if you will. We learn that our value comes from making other people comfortable and from never being a burden and always saying yes. And there's also cultural components, right? Because I think that for the most part, women are socialized to be accommodating, sometimes at their own expense. And men have an equally damaging message because they sometimes learn that vulnerability is weak. So then they sometimes shut down or they stonewall or they're like, everything's fine when you can clearly tell it's not. So here's what I want you to understand. These patterns made sense when you developed them. Your body was doing what it was supposed to do, whether it was from experiencing ongoing stress or cultural messaging or a bad relationship, or maybe you just have a very sensitive nervous system. Your brain did exactly what it needed to do to navigate your environment. So good job. Tell yourself, good job. Your body and your brain did what it needed to do. The challenge is that what helped you survive then could be holding you back now. Because the truth is, conflict really isn't dangerous. It shouldn't be. And disagreement doesn't mean somebody's going to abandon you. It shouldn't mean that. Having needs doesn't make you selfish. And expressing anger doesn't mean make you a bad person. The work for all of us who struggle with people pleasing or conflict avoidance isn't that we need to start being like, I'm going to just throw my stuff out there now. No, it doesn't mean it has to be destructive or that you have to let other people's emotions overshadow yours. It just means that we need to learn the difference between healthy disagreement and toxic fighting. And it's also about learning how to hold space for other people's emotions and then recognizing that, guess what? You get to share your emotions too. And that if you're in a healthy relationship, they're going to make space for you to do that. Conflict is not the enemy of relationships. It's usually the pathway to deeper connection. And people pleasing is not the way to healthier connection. It's the pathway to one-sided relationships where you just feel emotionally stunted. So let's get real then. What's this actually costing you? Because we've talked about the physical toll, the chronic tension, digestive issues, sleep problems. But then there's also what I think we need to kind of deep dive into, and that's the resentment spiral. Because that's what a lot of us get stuck in. That's how we really notice we're unhealthy, is when we start seething in resentment. When we feel like we are walking around with like a t-shirt that says, I am full of ugly resentment. So when you like keep saying yes, but you mean no, you build internal resentment and then you feel guilty because you're like, oh, I don't like this. So then you compensate and people please even more because you want to prove you're not a bad person. And then the cycle perpetuates. But the biggest cost is what these patterns are doing to your relationships. People avoiding conflict and people pleasing because, again, they think it's going to preserve their relationships. But actually, all it does is creates these shallow, unfulfilling connections that leave everyone feeling unseen, and unknown. And the most heartbreaking part is that conflict avoidant and people pleasers usually ended up surrounded by people who take advantage of them. They end up in these one-sided relationships where they're constantly giving but not receiving, constantly accommodating but never being accommodated, right? So if you're recognizing yourself in any of this that I've shared so far, you might be thinking, okay, so you just told me that my whole way of existing in the world is not really working and I could be destroying my relationships. So what do I do? Well, the good news is that awareness of what's going on with ourselves is the first step toward transformation. Everything that I described, we can learn. We can unlearn, relearn. We can't redo, but we can definitely unlearn unhealthy patterns. And we are healable, right? As humans, we can be healed. You develop these patterns for a reason, and now you can learn new ones. So the other thing is, let's reframe what actually is. So again, we have to stop thinking of conflict as dangerous and start thinking of it as information. It's data about what matters to people and how we learn about each other's values and boundaries. When you avoid conflict or you try to people please to prevent it, you're choosing kind of to stay, in the dark, if you will, versus intimacy. It's like choosing comfort, not choosing comfort and connection, but choosing almost to have this barrier there. So finally, how do we heal then? So we know kind of what we do, but now what? Like, how do we start this healing process? First of all, we have to kind of develop some body awareness. Your body, obviously, if you know anything about somatic therapy or just your fitness people, a lot of you, right? You work out, you train people, or you're just a fitness enthusiast, and or you're a wellness person and you love to learn about your mind and your body. Your body is going to signal when you're betraying yourself. That tight chest when someone asks you to do something you don't want to do, or the knot in your stomach when you're about to say yes, but you mean no, or that tension headache that I get, or my inability to sleep. I now know, hey, you know what? I'm holding stuff. I'm storing, I'm stacking, I got to get it out, right? Step 2 would be just tiny practices with no. It sounds silly, but practice saying no over silly things. Truth. So small, low stakes requests. So no to the cashier who's asking for a donation. Decline adding something to your order that you don't want. Build your conflict tolerance muscles gradually, and you'll realize that saying no doesn't have to be disastrous, right? Or maybe start by saying no to people who you consider to be more regulated and safe. Step 3, you can question the fear behind the pattern. So you can ask yourself, what am I really afraid is going to happen if I speak up? If I stop managing everyone's emotions, what might my life be like? Usually, those of us who do that, we have this fear of abandonment or this fear of being seen as selfish, often based on old programming that is no longer relevant. And then the 4th step is, again, as always, tap into your values. Before you automatically say yes or you jump into fixing someone's mood, just pause and ask, A, is this my job? And B, does it align with my values and my energy? Do I need to give me away to help them when really I'm taking away their personal autonomy if I do that? So am I saying yes because I really want to do it, or because I don't want to be uncomfortable if they get upset? And then last but not least, it's the boundary thing. Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier relationships. So instead of, I guess I could work this weekend, maybe it's just, I'm not available this weekend, but I'll prioritize that on Monday. Maybe it's, instead of trying to fix someone's bad mood, just saying something like, I can see you're upset. Is there something you need right now to kind of, work through those emotions? Like, give it back to them. They try to give it to you, you give it back to them. So they might seem like tiny changes, but they're actually revolutionary. You're rewiring your nervous system to believe that your needs matter because they do, and your preferences are valid, and you're not responsible for everyone else's emotions. So going back to my story, it took me decades to learn that I really couldn't lessen my mom's stress. I mean, I could be one less stressor, so to speak, but my actions didn't discount the actions of others. We alone cannot make other people's lives better. We can add love and support and authenticity, but we can't do their work. The very thing that I thought was helping, being this emotional barometer and fixing everyone, was really just kind of getting in the way of real connection, and it was exhausting me. The goal isn't to become someone who loves conflict or stops caring. It's to become someone who can tolerate temporary discomfort and, authentic connection and healthy boundaries, because that's going to lead you to deeper relationships. I remember a few years ago when I started opening up to my sister about something, and she said, Mom always said you were the sensitive one. I thought that was kind of funny. And I was like, tell me more. And she said, well, you always came across as being super strong, like you had it all together and you didn't, don't worry about Angie. And she said, but Mom always said, no, there's a sensitive part to her. She's not, she's not letting us see that. And I said, well, yeah, because I didn't feel like there was room, like there wasn't enough oxygen in the room. So it just gives you an idea that sometimes you just have to give people the opportunity to show up for you. You have to change your own story about who you think you're supposed to be, because I had to change mine. So remember, you don't have to choose between being a good person and taking care of yourself. You can be kind and still have boundaries. You can be loving and express your needs. And you can maintain healthy relationships and still be authentic. So the strong mind and strong body that you're building isn't just about physical fitness or mental toughness. It's about the courage to show up as your real self in a world that often rewards us, let's face it, for being fake, right? That's what social media is, the best of episodes of everyone's life. So I'm Angie. I'm so glad that you joined me for the Strong Mind, Strong Body episode. Until next time, I hope that you'll consider some of this. I hope that I hear from you and you tell me your thoughts about people pleasing and conflict avoidance. And by all means, if there's ever a topic you want to hear about, you can email me at angie@angiemillerwellness.com or reach out to me on social media. So I will see you next week.